So this is gonna be my first ever video with commentary. I don't know if I'm gonna post more of these in the future. I'm gonna see how this video goes. And in this video, I'm gonna talk about latency, which is kind of a polemic subject, but as you probably realize by now, if you look at my comments on other videos, I don't really care. But even if you don't agree with me when I say that you shouldn't get too mad when you get a latent player, I'm gonna talk about some stuff that might help you deal with this kind of situations. So latency is the kind of thing that even after 3 years, people don't seem to realize how that actually works. Like I see even many very good players complaining about latency. So like they're invading and they get a Japanese player. Actually, the worst latency are usually on Australia and Brazil, but it's usually against Japanese players because there is just more players in Japan than Australia and Brazil. So like they get a player like that and then they start saying, oh, they're fucking trash, nah, Wi-Fi build, can't be countered. And I kind of get it because of course it's not fun playing on high latency. It's not the ideal situation, but most of the times it's not even the player's fault, it's just how the game works. Because most of the time it's just latency because of the distance. But there is ways to tell if the latency is actually because of distance, or maybe the player really has bad internet. So like Phantom Range, for example, there are some things you can do to adapt, let's say, to Phantom Range. First you need to look if the latency is consistent or not. If the latency is consistent, then that's good news because you can calculate the amount of extra range that he has. Now, if the latency is not consistent, that's bad news because you never know if that's going to hit you or not. Because let's say you calculate the extra range from the first hit, and then he goes for the second hit, and since the latency already changed, then that phantom range can be higher. A good way to see if the latency is going to be stable or not is if the player is skipping. If he's skipping, that means he has bad internet probably. And if he's not skipping, that means he's probably just latent because of the distance. So if he's just latent, you can calculate the phantom range and adapt to it. But calculating phantom range is more like knowing your previous position than having in mind some kind of extra range. That's not how latency works, because let's say you're fighting a latent spear. If you were in that position like a second ago, maybe you should row. That's how latency works. It's basically the delay between the hits. So on his screen, maybe a second ago you were there, so maybe you should row. So calculating the phantom range on that situation would not be like having a bigger spear in your mind. It's more like paying attention on your previous position. That also means that phantom range doesn't just go in a straight line. As you see in the clip there, I got hit by a phantom range on the left. Now, one thing that the players do to test the latency against another player is throwing the knife or guardian shiv to test the latency. That's a good option, but you can also drop items on the floor to test the latency of the host. So if the latency is really high, the item on the floor is gonna take some time to appear, and you can have an idea of the kind of latency you're going to deal with. You can also compare no latency with the latency of the host by dropping him an item that he can see, like a Covenant item. Another thing that you have to keep in mind when fighting with high latency is if you're fighting someone that has hyper armor, he's using like a great sword or a ultra great sword. The thing is that on high latency, you will have the feeling that the host has more hyper armor, because sometimes you're gonna hit him and on his screen he already started the attack, but on your screen he still didn't. Hyper armor weapons, they have some kind of buff. Think about great swords and ultra great swords. All the weapons that have hyper armor is that they have hyper armor, high damage, but they are easily punished and slow, and that thing basically goes away on high latency. You can't whiff punish a great sword on higher latency because it's gonna have time enough to roll away. That is if you whiff punish on a reaction, of course. Now you can whiff punish if you calculate the latency right and get the right timing. But since he has hyper armor, if you attack him while he is technically doing nothing, you get the risk of attacking him while he's already on the attack animation. So to counter that, you have to either play exclusively reactive or use something that has more range than his weapon. One of the things you can try on high latency, even though some people don't really like it, is rollback steps. Now the reason why rollback steps can be good for high latency is because Like on your screen, if you roll and get to his back, on his screen he will still see you a little bit earlier. So even if he tries to punish you, you'll be already on his back and you'll get the backstab. Actually, trying to punish in those situations on high lanes is better for you because you trade, and then even if they get the hit on you, you get the backstab as well. And of course, a normal hit versus the backstab wins the trade, so you end up on the advantage. Now, if he doesn't try to punish you and he rolls away instead, then you will not be able to get the backstab probably, even if you keep trying, because it's going to be harder than on low latency. Now, of course, when people say it's a bad habit is because on low latency, if you try to do this, you will mostly get punished even by average players. So unless you're fighting like an ultra or something really slow, like a great hammer, maybe a great sword, don't try this on low latency. As for pivots, is pretty much the same thing. Like when they try to punish you, you'll be already on their back, and then you're already getting the backstab, and even if they hit connect you, you will trade a backstab versus our normal hit, so that's good for you. Not just that, but the thing about pivots on high latency is that, like when you're locking on, the tracking of the lock on, it's gonna be based on your screen. So like if the player is trying to backstab you on low latency, the lock is gonna follow him and it's going to prevent you from turning your back to the opponent. Now on a high latency, the tracking is not going to follow the player because there will be a difference between your screen and his screen, of course. On his screen, he will be already on your back probably, and on your screen, he will be a little bit earlier. So the tracking is not going to follow the player, and therefore it's going to be easier for him to backstab you. And that's why it's a little bit easier to do pivots on high latency. One other thing is, like when you're trading hits on high latency, it's a little bit different than low latency. Like on low latency, if you trade a curved sword against a twin axis, for example, the curved sword is going to stop the animation of the twin axis, and it's going to win the trade, obviously. But on high latency, they're going to trade hits, and because the twin axis does way more damage, the twin axis is going to win the trade. So we have to keep that in mind as well. So yeah, let me know if this video was helpful, if you learned something, if you already knew everything I said. I might do videos like this in the future, I don't know. I'm gonna see how this video goes. Maybe I'll do a different one with a different subject. But yeah, till next time, I guess.